Hey everybody, Weird Lighting, Gabe here from the Spine Crackers podcast, and a little bit late, but I'm doing my books I read in March video for all of you. We're well into March now. I think today's the 11th, um, but or well into April, I should say. But wanted to get this out before while I had some time. So I read 13 books in March. One of them I do not have a physical copy of, but it's related to another book that I read, so I'll mention that when I get to the other book. So a good month. I'm a little bit behind already in April. I've only done like 2 books, but we'll see if things pick up. I've been playing Dark Souls for the first time, and that's been cutting into my reading time, shall we say. But hopefully I can find a better balance for the rest of the month. So, these are not in order. There were a couple books that I read this month that really may make their way onto my sort of favorite books of the year list. That's obviously hard to predict this early on in the year, but some real bangers this month. So let's just get into it. I'll just go through the ones that we read for the podcast first, because I won't talk about those. We read Olga to Karchix, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. This was my first. That episode is already out. That you can find it on the channel or wherever you get podcasts. So I won't talk too much about this. My first Tokarczuk. I won't spoil the podcast too much, but it wasn't particularly encouraging in terms of wanting to go read more for work, although I will do so because there's a lot of people who I trust who swear by her or at least enjoy her immensely. Other podcast books were The Appointment by Katerina Volkmer. Really interesting little kind of subversive tale. I won't give away too much about it, but again, that episode is out already on the channel. All of these are. We also had Leviathan by Paul Auster. I think this is my third or fourth Auster, and another interesting one. And then John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress, which is a fascinating piece of writing. So as I say, I won't say too much about those because those are, I've said all that I can possibly say about them on the podcast episodes. Okay, what else we got here? I read, for the first time in my life actually, Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. This is a book that I managed to get through all of high school without reading. I made a video on it that's on the channel as well, not a full podcast episode, just me talking about it a bit. Really enjoyed it. We'll definitely want to be reading more Hawthorne, and I think it's one of those books that if you haven't read it in a while, you should revisit it, because it probably is different than you remembered it in high school, or at least you're going to be different, and so you might experience it differently, which I think is a big part of rereading things. Let's see here. I read a number of nonfiction books this month. I read Graham Harmon's Immaterialism, really short little introduction to his sort of theory of, you may know Harmon, or you may know the theory that he sort of spawned, object-oriented ontology. I won't get too deep into the philosophical aspects of it here, but it's a theory that is kind of pretty hot right now. Sort of the prioritization, or not prioritization, but the inclusion of objects in our ontological thinking. Harmon argues that humans and humanity have been sort of prioritized in thinking about ontology for too long, and that's been to the detriment of our philosophical investigations. Shoutouts Wittgenstein. This was a good introduction. I do want to read his book, which I believe is just called Object-Oriented Ontology, which I also have. This one, it was good. It was a good sort of introduction to the thought. Most of the book is dedicated to a really, really long example that he thinks is useful for illustrating some of his ideas. So he talks a lot about the Dutch East India Company and the history of it, as a sort of example of the ways in which his theory can be applied to objects. So already controversially, he thinks of the Dutch East India Company itself as an object. So a little bit of a specialized definition there. I don't think the example was quite as illustrative as he seems to think it is. It was helpful, but it wasn't like the clearest thing that it could have been. Although it did inspire me, because the history was really interesting, to buy a book on the history of the Dutch East India Company, and another book on sort of that era more generally, which I'm using to prop up my computer right now. It's called Merchant Kings. I forget what the subtitle, when companies ruled the world or something like that. And it's about that era. Interesting little book. I think a lot of people from what I have seen are misusing Harman's theory, but that's a can of worms that I won't get into. Next, and this one, to be fair, the next two I didn't fully read this month. I just finished them, although I did the bulk of the reading in these books this month. I would say, 4/5 or so of both of these I read this month. So I finished Alistair MacIntyre's collection of essays against the self-images of the age. This is a wide-ranging collection that ranges from, the first half is more sort of political essays on sort of Marxism and ideology, and some reviews of books that MacIntyre had published up until this point. Some helpful, some very outdated, some not really. Again, just sort of book reviews that didn't really illuminate a ton of MacIntyre's bigger project. And then the second half, it's not really a half because it's the bulk of the book, but the second part is more specific philosophical essays. These are going to be probably too technical in most cases to be helpful for people who aren't trained in academic philosophical writing, or who don't have deep interests in the specific topics of the essays. So some of these range from things that I am interested in and have read about previously, so I liked them, and then some were just things that I don't really care about and never really had an interest in when I was studying philosophy even. So and also some are just out of date. This book is, these essays were collected or from earlier on in MacIntyre's career than what most people know him for, which is After Virtue. So a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I think that obviously it's a collection of essays, so you don't want to hold it to the standard of a sustained philosophical argument, but MacIntyre does go out of his way in the introduction to argue or make the claim that there is a through line through these essays. I personally could not find one, frankly, in terms of MacIntyre's overall philosophical project. I feel like it's a similar experience to the one that I remember having with After Virtue, which I plan on rereading soon, which was that it was somehow less than the sum of its parts. Some great arguments, some important points, but at the end of the day, no real cohesive agenda or anything to sort of latch onto in a positive sense, which is a little bit frustrating, but enjoyable nonetheless. The other one I read or finished reading is Felix Martin's Money, the Unauthorized Biography. This is a sort of history of money and some discussion of monetary theory and economic theory and philosophy. Really deeply fascinating book. Martin makes a lot of compelling arguments to the effect that the way that we understand money currently and historically after a certain point, a few key points, is completely wrongheaded and leads to a lot of economic problems that could be avoided if we changed our sort of philosophical understanding about money and treated it differently in our economic structures. I won't go into the details. This one was, I think, readable for someone who doesn't have any expertise in economics, which is me, certainly. But there were parts of it where I was getting a little bit lost in some of the technical language, or at least just economic specific language. So I found myself having to look up terms, in some sections quite a bit. But really interesting intellectual history and some compelling arguments, I think, in here, at least from my perspective. So I'm really glad I read this one. Okay, back to the fiction. I read Tove Jansson's The Summer Book. If you saw my February video, in that video I talk about my experience with The True Deceiver. which I enjoyed quite a bit. This one I loved. It really blew me away. This is one of the most just sort of soul nourishing, comforting books that I've read probably in my life. It's very short, it's only about 160 pages or so. There's some lovely illustrations in here, and it's the story just about, it's sort of a series of vignettes that follow a young girl and her grandmother on their family's sort of summer vacation island home. And it is just so lovely and melancholy and sad, and I really this is a book that I could see myself reading, periodically for the rest of my life, just whenever I need a nice kind of soul check-in, I suppose. It was much less sort of plot driven than The True Deceiver was. That book had a bit of a more cohesive sort of storyline and some tension and conflict and so on and so forth, and there is some of that in this book, but it's mostly sort of as I say, vignettes of the grandmother and this young girl, and the girl growing up bit by bit, and the grandmother reckoning with aging. And it's just read it. It'll take a few hours of your time, and I thought it was just really perfect, and something, as I say, that I will have ready at hand whenever I need to, I need some sustenance spiritually. The next one I read was Virginia Woolf's Between the Acts. This is her final novel. It's sort of in a weird place between finished and unfinished, because the manuscript was complete, as far as I understand it. If I'm wrong about this, correct me. The manuscript was complete when Woolf died, but it had not gone through any editing, or she hadn't sort of cleaned it up and trimmed it or added or whatever. So it's pseudo complete, and also pseudo incomplete, I suppose. This is a story about it all takes place in one day, as Woolf is wont to do on occasion. And it follows a number of characters, sort of the English upper crust, who are gathering for an annual sort of town celebration at this estate that always involves the putting on of a play and the watching of the play by the audience. And as is suggested in the title, most of the sort of tension and action takes place in the conversations and behaviors of the various characters sort of between the acts of the play. And then it creates a really fascinating sense of tension between the stuff that goes on between the acts, and then when everyone is sitting down to watch the play, the exchanges of looks, the people sort of whispering to one another. It's really Woolf creates this really incredible atmosphere of tension, romantic tension, sexual tension. There's class dimensions to the novel. Sort of the play is sort of a history of England. And this might be, I've only read, how many other Woolfs have I read? Just two or just one? I can't even remember. I think I may have only read Mrs. Dalloway. I have To the Lighthouse and The Waves over on my shelf, but I haven't gotten to them yet. I think I liked this more than Mrs. Dalloway, which I loved. And this is another one that really just, some of the passages in here are, just from a prose perspective, just absolutely incredible. It's a little more I think readable to the average reader than something like Mrs. Dalloway in terms of its style, a little bit more sort of parsable, if that makes sense. But Woolf doesn't lose any of the sort of descriptive power that she shows in that book, or any of the sort of momentum that she's able to develop. It's all sort of sustained through here, but also drawn back in certain ways as well. And the ending is just, which I won't spoil, the ending is just incredible. The central tension is around a husband and wife who are sort of in an unhappy marriage, and a woman comes to the celebration who is sort of flirty with the husband, and sort of brings to the surface some of these buried problems in their relationship. And the way the book ends, I think, is just perfect and just so sad, thinking about Woolf's own life. All right, the next one. Oh, crap. I forgot to mention the one that I don't have a physical copy of. So I mentioned that we read the John Bunyan, The Pilgrim's Progress, for the podcast. I also read, in preparation for that episode, the Cambridge Companion to Bunyan, which is a collection of academic sort of interpretive essays about Bunyan and his work. And it was really great. It was, pretty slim, I think, for those companions. It wasn't like overwhelmingly long. If you're picking up like the companion to Milton or Melville or something, they can run a number of hundreds of pages. But this one was significantly shorter, I think less than 200. But it was a really nice, wide array of essays about Bunyan and interpreting Bunyan historically and literarily. There were essays about Bunyan's sort of autobiography, his own spiritual journey. There were essays about Bunyan's relationship to the development of mass printing in England at the time. There were essays about Bunyan's sort of colonial and decolonial and post-colonial impact, because the book was one of the most widely translated and sold books in the world for a long time. I mean, still is. And so it really was a nice sort of survey of the academic discourse around Bunyan that really sort of heightened my enjoyment of the book, which I already enjoyed quite a bit. The next one I read was Jesmond Ward's Sing, Unburied, Sing. This is a highly sort of lauded novel from a few years ago, I think 2017 or 2018. 2017. And this follows a family, really, but it alternates between two points of view: a mother and her son who live together with the mother's parents and her dying mother and her aging father. And the story follows them on a road trip. The mother and the son, along with one of the mother's friends, basically follows them on a road trip to meet the father of the main character who is being released from prison. And him and the mother, it's an interracial relationship. So the book deals a lot with sort of the complexities of family dynamics in the South, the racial, questions about interracial relationships, and the sort of legacies of trauma and violence that sort of come down through families and through that history. And it's a very, I really don't like the phrase magical realism or surrealism or whatever, but there are a number of elements of that in the book. And some of the characters who are very important to the story are sort of spectral, ghost-like characters that only one or the other of the two main characters can see, or occasionally both. Really a beautiful novel and a fantastic sort of meditation on the legacies of racial violence in America, with just a compelling main story and compelling characters. So really enjoyed this one, and we'll probably be reading more of Ward in the future, or I don't know what her other novels is. Yeah, okay, there's a few other ones that I'll check out. Salvage the Bones, maybe. The last one I read is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. This is the first time that I've read this one in my life, and I figured it was time to get to it. As I mentioned, I think in my last video, I'm sort of semi-unconsciously doing one kind of legendary book or classic book that I haven't read yet, that I'm a month. And this was the one for this month. I thought it's beautiful, it's incredible, it's almost all of the things that you've heard people say about it. I won't repeat them all here. The praise that Blood Meridian gets, and it's entirely justified. I did make a video for the Spinecrackers Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/spinecrackers, about some of the interpretive questions and potential problems that I had with the text. I won't rehash those here. If you are interested in my thoughts, like I said, you can go to the Spinecrackers Patreon. But what I will say is that there was a bit of discourse on BookTube a couple months ago. I think Orpheus released a video about sort of defending Blood Meridian from some of the right-wing interpretations, which when I watched that video, I didn't even really understand that was a thing. that was a way of reading the book. So that was really interesting to see. But as I say, I won't go through my entire sort of thing here, but what I will say is that after having finished the book, it is less clear to me that those sorts of interpretations can be dismissed as easily as I think many of the book's fans want to dismiss them. I think there's more there that makes those sorts of right-wing interpretations of the book interpretively plausible, and I just think it needs to be reckoned with. Maybe I'll make a YouTube video about it eventually, but most of my thoughts, as I say, are over on the Patreon video. That takes away nothing from the just beauty of the writing, the sort of power of McCarthy's images, his sort of command of this period of American history and this specific place in America and the various literary references. That takes away nothing from any of that, and those things are all still towering achievements. But I think there's more to be said in the conversation about this book, at least interpretively. So I'll leave it at that. Again, you can see the full video if you want to. And that's it. Those are the books that I read in March. I will be doing another one of these in April. My current pace sticks up or holds up. It'll be many fewer than this, but it's a long journey to 100 books in a year, and I think I'm still ahead of the pace. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any suggestions, recommendations that you think I should read, let me know, and I will check in the comments. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, do the YouTube things, like, subscribe if you want to, and the Patreon and all of that will be in the description. Thanks.